Welcome everybody. Welcome to the second of our conversations about living and leading wisely at this time of COVID-19. How can we access wisdom at this really pressing time for us all? We started in our first conversation with Jane Gaukroger, talking about organisational wisdom. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by my great friend and colleague, Alison Hogan, who you will see on screen here. So Alison, do say hello, because I want to say something about you, but there you are.
Hi,
and,
I'm here.
I mean, I want to wax lyrical about you because you've been such an important part of my life, very precious as a friend. You introduced me to Gestalt, you're my coaching supervisor, and just a great friend. And so it's a moment to say public thanks for that. And you've been in the whole world of leadership for the last 20 years, having been a business journalist and corporate affairs consultant before, and now you're a fellow of the faculty of the Centre for Leadership at Exeter, isn't it? The Exeter Centre for Leadership. I said faculty, I shouldn't, the fellow of that. And before I hand over to you and we have a conversation, we're going to talk about the notion of empty space and not knowing, and all our discourse of wisdom, about wisdom, comes quite a lot to the notion of transition, doesn't it? To the notion of big transitions in our lives, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood to old age. Transitions of life stage, whether it's to do with jobs or location or house or relationship, but also transitions day to day in our very fast moving world, day to day of shift. And this notion of empty space, not knowing, has come up in our conversation, Alison. I just would love to have a chat with you about it and see where your mind is on it. Why the notion of empty space? What's brought your interest in it? What do we mean by it?
Thank you for the introduction. I could give glowing how much our friendship and working together has meant to me as well. So it's wonderful to be doing this. I think as far as this particular thing goes, I think that over the years, what I've realized, probably it's in my own, we learn a lot from ourselves and then from others. So I think what I found was that I realized that I'm a great doer, and for many years, I like achieving things. I've had some, really fascinating, demanding, sort of work. And then gradually, and I sort of realized how difficult it can be, but actually the richness. So when you stop stepping out, increasing awareness, the need for rest, space to just dwell. And also I think there's, as I've in the last, together it's nearly been 20 years when I've been doing more on the side of coaching, facilitation, working with people, particularly with leaders, I've come to appreciate more and more about just that sense of how we need sort of to be more open to what's going on around us, and actually when I see particularly good leaders and good people, or whatever definition of good is to me, they've obviously, what you've seen, have been on some journey themselves of the learning, being more at ease with themselves, more honest about themselves, more open to what's going on in the world, not blinkered. So I guess there's something about that that's made me, I've taken me years to learn to be more at ease and to more of the being than the doing and the knowing. And so I think it's been a lens that's helped me with others as well, and helping them on their own self-development and realization. That makes sense. Yeah,
so sort of lens of journey of open mind, open space, open thinking, been an important journey for you.
Yeah, and it's about the inner self.
Yeah.
It's about learning more, looking inward to find out who you really are, rather than always thinking somehow it's how you are out in the world. It's that integration of both, really.
Yeah. And this notion now of empty space, not knowing, being at ease in it, how would you bring it alive for us? So we can touch and feel it? What does it look like? What does it mean? Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, as you said right at the beginning, I think probably what I've noticed, I'm sure everyone notices, that how hard it can be to just to notice and attend to some of the threads in our life, begin with endings of things and beginnings. We have a habit of finishing something, rushing to something else, particularly if it's difficult or something ends not well, whether it is a relationship, it might be a job. you know, we constantly want to sort of move on to the other thing, and so realize that actually if we want to stay sort of in the flow, it's much more around, can we find the time to just stop and recognize what's happening? Maybe in the concept of Gestalt is, what's unfinished business here? And if we can spend some time on that, what's the learning from it, and how can we move forward sort of more coherently, really? So I think it's something about recognizing sometimes people are a bit fearful of being on their own, you know, of actually looking inward and being honest with ourselves about our strengths and our weaknesses. And yet there is something about, if we can stay in that liminal space, it can be very creative, it can be very rich in possibilities. So that's I think what I find is always important, but perhaps particularly important in this time of such uncertainty.
And the notion of liminal, yeah. It's the notion of threshold, isn't it? Between things, between thoughts, between space.
Yes.
The notion, I mean, like between sleep and wakefulness, or between ideas, or moving from one place to another, we're not sure of our surroundings and environments. That sense, isn't it, of, I was thinking of one of my children going to Freshers Week, and that's a liminal moment, isn't it? You're going into a place where the patterns aren't set, it's very open. Is that what we mean by liminal moment, that notion of between?
Yes, it is certainly a between, and as you say, it can be very varied in how aware we are of it, or almost the strength of it. And I think, you know, working as a coach with executives and leaders, you know, in our careers, say, and it can be in our professional and personal lives, we will tend to, you know, it's inevitable almost that we'll go through truth transitions, and it's almost how constructively and how aware are we of that, and being open to change of direction. I mean, you know, it's many years ago now, but there's a time when I took a sabbatical, and I loved my job. It was incredibly demanding, but I really loved it. I loved the people. I loved the clients, but you know, it was all consuming. So deep down, I knew this was something wrong, something that wasn't quite fully me in it. And yet it was so exciting, kind of moving, that it was hard for me to really make sense of what it was, this disquiet. So actually the sabbatical in that period was very much a transition, and it gave me time to step back and think, and to be, and to see there was a world outside this workaholic existence, and that I was only almost looking at from the outside in. So I think, you know, and I've noticed that with a lot of people, you know, sometimes it happens quite toughly, you know, people who maybe lose their job, made redundant, or have some really challenging circumstances in their life. At first, there's a real fear of what's the meaning of it. But actually, quite often people will say, if they just somehow allow things to happen, to think about it, have an empty space, new possibilities come out. And I think we're seeing that really interestingly now with such disruption. So many people are saying, well, my goodness, we've got to think differently about how we live, how we work, the future of, in some cases, the future of our businesses. So I think that's something about the richness of, if we just stop and allow us to dwell in what I describe as this kind of empty space.
Because, I mean, yeah, I'm absolutely hearing you on being all consumed and stepping away from it, from doing into being. And we're here, aren't we, we could say this is a massive liminal moment we're in now. I mean, I met someone in the park the other day I hadn't spoken to for a bit, and the way he was describing things was, well, it was before Corona, BC, and yet we don't know how we're going to find the end of this. We're very much between. That's the notion of the Overton window, where things seem more possible, there's more potential, a time of creative uncertainty, but also a time of real pressure for people.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that I'm really aware of, that we also have to watch even now, because I remember thinking at the outset, a real sense of spaciousness, you know, I won't be traveling up to London, and all this time, you know, and then what we do, we fill it. Our instinct is just to fill it. And so suddenly you think, well, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I may be enjoying what I'm doing, but I'm busy. And I think there's something really hard about just resting, and that it's not a negative, empty resting. I mean, we've talked about Gestalt, you know, they talk about this, the fertile void, because it's not empty, it's very vital. And actually, if we can stay in it for a while, we can come out resourced and vitalized. I mean, I just love, this was one little short quote, there's this lovely neutrality in which one no longer feels pulled towards one extreme or the other, no longer prisoner of one way of seeing the world, which inevitably blinds one to possibilities. And I think that's a real core element of what I would see as cultivating wisdom, of having time to see possibilities, of being able to let go. Because if we don't, there's no room for the richness of new to emerge.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, one of the wisdoms, definitions of wisdom is striving a balance between knowing and doubting. I think it takes quite a lot of courage to stay in that space. If we look at the experts, I'm not going to start talking about the politicians, but you know, there's this huge wish for expertise, to know what to do, to be decisive. But I actually think if you think of if you see someone who feels wise, then actually they're not full of hubris. If anything, they're more humble, and they can live with not knowing. And they realize the world's full of dilemmas, not certainty. And my sense is that you can only reach that understanding of being balanced. You know, it's somewhere between accepting that within us we are both fearful and fearless. We can both know and doubt, collaboration and competition. You know, there are all those sort of, the polarities are in us. And I think there's something about, it takes time to understand that and accept it. And if we do, I think we show up, we're more aware of how we are, how others are, the context that we're in. Beautiful
description of the fertile void there. So what we're hearing you talk about is staying open to possibilities, above all through holding both and, holding polarities
Yes.
open, whether it's fearfulness, fearlessness, courage, risk, holding those and not moving to something which gives us necessarily certainty, to embrace the uncertainty that's involved in that, to be at ease with that. Am I hearing right, Ali?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and I think it really is hard to just be. But actually, once you start luxuriating in it, if you really accept and enjoy it, it's so rich. You know, you suddenly realize how blinkered we are. You know, it's like if we're always searching for, we miss what we don't see. We don't look out of the corner of our eyes. I mean, I think, you know, again, some of the lockdown for me has been around actually how much more aware and observing I have been of all that's around me, whether it's the people, whether it's nature. You know, how much time do we spend in automaticity? And therefore, every time we're not present, truly present, what are we missing? So I think it's that, and it takes practice. And I think it's interesting because I know through the Golden Civilization there's quite a focus on mindfulness. I think the practice of mindfulness, which is around strengthening our self-awareness, awareness of others, awareness of being present, is part of the practice that also I think supports us in dwelling in this kind of liminality or this fertile void.
Well, perhaps Ali, I might take that as a cue for a conversation about, so how can we stay at ease with uncertainty? How can we do that? And you've been talking here about mindfulness as one thing. I mean, certainly as I listen to you and I think about my experience in the last few weeks, and I'm in a comfortable place and I have lots of time and I'm not under work pressure, but I'm still finding, I think as you were alluding to, things to do or get on with, and that's my extrovert personality. It's my siren call which takes me off into activity, some of it which is really helpful to both myself and others, but there's a bit too much of it. What would you start to say to us about being at ease with uncertainty, holding these dilemmas, staying with them? What could you suggest to us that might be helpful?
Well, I think some of it is about noticing when we get fixed in something, or noticing the fear, the caution, you know, and balancing that with looking for where can we find optimism rather than being pessimistic, about in life what will take us forward to move rather than be paralyzed, not to be overwhelmed with the uncertainty. So there is something about seeking the good, you know, being with people who resource you as well as the you know, that don't. It's about finding our own way, I think, of finding peace. Because it's from finding our places of peace and being at ease with ourselves, I think we're in a better position to accept or to move forward. You know? I'm not sure.
So there's a lot in there, isn't there, about having a really kind and generous and compassionate voice within ourselves, isn't there? About looking at and taking stock of and naming what we're really good at, deep sense of purpose, deep sense of values. What are those? I've heard you talk, you've talked with me about curiosity.
Yes.
You were alluding to that earlier in terms of observation. Curiosity through our own dialogue with ourselves and with others.
Yes.
Seems very important.
Yes, I would say that.
To you as well.
Yes, because it is about how do we consider the other. You know, noticing when we're bringing judgment.
Yes.
Noticing when, you know, rather than being open and accepting of other people. So I think some of that is really important to understand in ourselves. If we can show up non-judgmentally in a detached way, really be open to accept someone, whoever they are, wherever they come from, whatever their differences, notice about how inclusive we're being, tending towards more collaboration than being competitive. So I think that would be some of the things that I would say allows us to feel easier, you know, just to challenge ourselves about what drives us and why, or is it expectations of what we think others think we should be doing or others think we should be like, rather than actually what really matters in life. I mean, I was interested, there was an article I was reading lately, and I forget now, but there was quite a number of senior leaders, maybe it was in the Financial Times, and what was the first thing they were going to do? And they were all quite well-known figures, and they nearly all said the first thing they wanted to do was just be with family and hug them. And these are kind of global leaders, you know, the head of the IMF, or, you know, and it was interesting because actually strip it all away, what matters? And really, I think we don't get to that unless we strip it all away and get to this empty space to some extent.
Well, strip away what's elemental, what's fundamental. We're hearing you say, aren't we? And this, I mean, it's such a strong theme, isn't it, for all of us, and the way political and social debate is about disagreement to judgment and our propensity to do that, and how can we open ourselves up through curiosity. So that when that disagreement starts, no, I don't like that, I hate that, is to reframe that around, well, I wonder what's happening here, I'm interested in that. I'm hearing you say that it's that sort of framing you're talking about. It is, yes. It's just
staying in dialogue much longer and really being open to the possibilities and listening to people without judgment, being, you know, open to new ideas and perspectives is really important. You know, as you say, it's tough, but, you know, if we can be more at ease with the polarities, accept sadness as well in ourselves, as well as joy, the pessimism as well as the optimism, being cautious as well as courage, then I think we can be a lot more human.
Yeah. I think
we have to somehow befriend that full spectrum, befriend it all, hold it all.
I was cutting across you. There's the notion of befriending the whole spectrum.
Yeah, so we hold it, acknowledging it all in us and in others.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easier said than done.
Easier said than done. And I think another thing we've spoken about, Alison, is the notion of endings. And you were alluding to that earlier.
Yes.
Finished business and so forth. There's something in here, isn't there, about good endings and being able to do that.
Yes.
You know, as I said just before we started this call, one of my children's just finished his last final exam, and he's thinking, oh, what next? Well, there's a process for him of ending, isn't there? Ending.
There is, very important one to take that time.
What would you say to us about that? What would you say to us? Endings and letting go.
Well, I think it's noticing what's unfinished. What do we need to let go of so that we can be centered and present and move forward? So, you know, sometimes it's a conversation that we realize we haven't had that we need to have. Sometimes it's just noticing what's gnawing away inside us. That's what's unfinished. And it's
Yes.
not to say everything's going to end brilliantly. I mean, it might be the end of a difficult relationship, or it might be the moving from a job. But actually, you know, there's something prosaic, and it just comes to mind, if you're doing a job, you know, can you have a proper exit interview? Can you somehow explore? And I think it's that sense of, it can be a bit painful. And if we've been hurt or it's tough, our instinct is just to shut the door and move on, but it stays with us.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can just stay in a detached way and look at it and see, what can I learn from that? Is there something unfinished that actually, if we did have a conversation or I did do something, if I did revisit in some way, you just know deep inside, you'd feel that sort of that deep release of tension that makes it easier to move on. So that's, I think, that's sort of a sense of what I mean by, can we pay attention to the good endings?
Yes. And there's, you know, there's a sense, isn't there, that, again, in this crisis, we want to use that word, which affects us all, which is unequally born. Is there a hell of a lot of endings going on?
Yes.
Both recent and coming along. And we've been in conversation, haven't we, about how to approach some of those. So at a prosaic level, you know, this summer is usually full of holidays. So take a prosaic example, which we love, and yet many of us aren't going to be able to do that. So perhaps part of dealing with that ending, that loss, is to think, well, what does that represent to me fundamentally? What are some of the characteristics of it? Are there other ways in which I can replicate those things in my other ways, whether it's about society or friendship or whatever, and find another way of meeting the needs which were encapsulated in them?
Yes, yeah. And I think that's the question, because we are in a crisis, but it's not going to end. My sense is this is a period of, you know, when there's total global disruption. So maybe it'll be, in a way, and it'll carry on in a way which will keep us in a more heightened sense of awareness, and be harder to slip back into automatic ways of being. And out of that, maybe some different changes will happen. So that how do we sustain the sort of purpose that people have found, because the way they've had the common enemy of COVID-19. So, you know, it's brought out the best in people, and you have people volunteering, you have people caring about their neighbours, all sorts of ways, you know, people doing the best they can at work, you know, however remotely. So that spirit, everyone says, when you talk to says, I hope we can keep it. And, you know, how can we keep it? Because we've been in phases like this before, and as soon as somehow the shared purpose or the shared threat lessens, many people might slip back into it, the kind of very deeply embedded old ways of being. But so I'd like to sort of think that the more we spend time really absorbing and understanding this space, maybe we'll find more permanent ways of staying open, of being at ease with the ambiguity. Who knows?
But what a lovely way to perhaps approach the end of this conversation, Alison. So rich, and I was just going to pick out a couple of themes which we've heard you talk about, but perhaps when I've done that, I might invite you just, you know, what would be your last words on this, about being at ease in this empty space? Because it's been lovely listening to you and talking to you about, both at a personal level for you, but also at a thinking level, what this means about being at ease in the empty space, about knowing and doubting, about the notion of unfinished business, about the challenges that our personality can take us to, about looking for certainty or security or whatever. And you've offered us a whole range of ways in which we can be at ease in these moments, whether it's through mindfulness or embracing both and, or whether it might be about really thinking about how we're ending things, about being in curiosity, about being in dialogue, both with self but with others, watching the challenge of disagreement. Such richness in that, Alison, and thank you. What would be your last words? That always sounds a bit dramatic, but what would you leave us with on this?
Well, there are two things. I think what I'm increasingly finding, and of course I forget and I have to go back, and you know, it's a lifetime thing. But I mean, I know I've said to you, I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but I first discovered it so many years ago, long before anything like COVID-19 came along. And it's this wonderful book by Peter Brook, the theatre director. And I just love, I'm not going to read out the whole quote, but you know, he says, in order for something of quality to take place, an empty space needs to be created. An empty space makes it possible for new phenomenon to come to life. However, no fresh and new experience is possible if there isn't pure virgin space ready to receive it. So that sort of inspires one to notice and create the space rather than fear it. So I think there's something about that, of it's something about a joy, not something to be suffered. And I think the only other thing I think, which is about this only matters if we continue to connect with others. This isn't something, I mean, it's about, I'm only going into myself to be able to go out. And so I think my final thing is, and I'm sure I've shared with this you, but I love the Zulu phrase, you know, sawubona, which basically is what they say instead of saying hello. And it means I see you, I value you. And I think there's something about that every time we're connecting, whether it's you and me, whether it's family, friends, people in the street, in the shops or whatever, is actually noticing, really connecting with them. And so, you know, the sawubona, I see you. Because I think if we do that and we're wholly present and we connect, then we'll treat it, you know, I think we'll connect a lot more powerfully, and you know, it'll be better dialogue and better understanding. There'll be an outcome. Alison,
wonderful. What a great note to end on about I see you, connection. Creating the virgin space is a joy for what can follow, the potentiality. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just by way of segue to what we're doing next, we're moving next to a conversation with our friend Adam Wells, which will be about movement, about the notion of movement and walking and the wisdom of journey, hero's journey, pilgrimage. And he's talking with us in about a week's time about the wisdom of the Il Camino. So we'll look forward to that. And Alison, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful 25 minutes.
Thanks, Julian.
Thank Cheers. Bye.